Welcome to 52 Miniatures, my name is Alex. In this video, I'll be painting some Warhammer Terminators, giving them a lustrous metallic red paint job using simple techniques. So simple, in fact, that it only took me an evening to paint a squad of Terminators. And there's a reason for this. In all their glory, the Cataphractii Terminators from Games Workshop's Horus Heresy, or like the kids call it, Warhammer 30k. If you know nothing of Warhammer, well, first off, welcome, and I hope you don't mind the smell of worse things than napalm in the morning. Warhammer 40,000 is the big box office hit, the world's most popular miniature tabletop wargame system, and Warhammer, the Horus Heresy, is the prequel that doesn't actually suck. Now these miniatures are for my 7-year-old son. He wanted something cool, something that looks like robot people with guns, preferably big guns, and lots of armor. Also swords are cool. We agreed upon the fact that these Terminators, super soldiers in super armor with super weapons, are all of the above. I rather like them. If you really want to know things about Terminator armor and take a deep dive into the world of Warhammer, you can check out the link to Arbiter Ian's engaging account, now linked up in the right-hand corner. I based these miniatures using bark, more specifically, admittedly not at all specific regarding the type of bark. This is orchid soil. You're supposed to plant orchids in it. A big bag bought in a garden store that I've sterilized in the oven, not the bag, the soil. Essentially, a bag containing more basing material than you'll ever need, exquisitely cheap in comparison to dedicated hobby products. In a miniature world, this will look like stone slabs and dirt and concrete rubble and such. The day before painting, I primed these miniatures black so that the primer would have time to cure properly. By the way, for those of you that are used to a more, Ben-Hur scale miniature painting video production, this one's going to be simpler. Anyway, what I want to show you is a really cool metallic red technique that one of my patrons showed me recently. A scheme I thought would fit these models well, and it's based on a golden undercoat that I applied with my airbrush. A rich, warm gold paint. Another way of doing this would be to skip the black base coat entirely and just start with rattle canning everything with a gold spray. If you only use brushes, I'd strongly recommend checking out Vince Venturella's recipe for a great brush-on gold paint, now linked above. After the first gold base coat, I then dry brush everything with a brighter, not as warm or yellow gold paint, giving everything a nice highlight. The point of this gold is twofold. I'm going to use it as gold details, but it's also going to provide the metallic undercoat for the transparent red paint that is to come. The warm yellow metallic paint will be filtered through red, creating a shiny, warm, almost orange luster to the red surface. I've set myself a time limit to paint these 5 miniatures in an evening. I mean, don't get me wrong, I try to be a kind father. But let's face it, after a few violent altercations with Lego ninjas riding dragons and whatnot, these miniatures are going to get pretty battered. Spending a lot of time on them could be considered unnecessary. Also, the time limit is good practice, but I'll talk more about that later on. I'm using contrast paint. I think it's great for this application, but the important thing is to use something transparent. If you have other contrast style paints or transparent inks, that can work as well. And I mean, you don't have to leave gold details like I have. You could just slap red all over. That would definitely speed up the process. But I mean, look at this red metallic surface. It's so cool. It's got this really nice depth to it, yet there's nothing really that suggests that there's gold underneath. Just very cool red armor panels. Imagine a vehicle painted like this. Anyway, while I continue on with some black contrast paint, black bits for bumping up the contrast is nice on a miniature, I'd like to talk a little about the main reason for my time limit, regardless of the pending doom of sticky children's fingers. I'm not much of a fan of the concept of speed painting. Personally, the theory of inducing the term speed to our hobby is like going to Maranello in Italy asking the good people at Ferrari if they could maybe design their cars to not go so fast. And while you're at it, a larger boot to fit grocery bags would be nice too. Painting tiny miniatures with tiny brushes during a quiet hour in the evening with a nice cup of tea is not a speedy affair. The ritual, for me, is almost meditational. Speeding through it would defeat the purpose of the entire affair. There are different levels of, let's call it, quality, individual to the person doing the painting, of course. There are shortcuts and planning that can reduce the time spent on a miniature, and equally there are techniques that can greatly prolong the affair. Setting a time limit, like 2 hours, on one miniature, or for me, a squad in an evening, is an interesting concept. What can I achieve within this specific time frame? From this we can start counting. How long would a warband take? How long would an army take? Or, I don't like the look of 1 hour's work, but 2 should be good enough for what I'm going for. It's like getting to know yourself as a painter. And with some of this knowledge, you can plan projects. Getting together with some friends in a month to play Kill Team? Yeah, well, if I paint to my basic level, I could definitely have miniatures finished. Or, I want to try and enter a model to a competition next month in my local game club. That's definitely doable. Getting to know yourself as a painter like this, realizing how much time specific projects require can actually reduce the stress sometimes involved. Let's get on with the paint job at hand. With a silver metallic paint, I dry brush all the things I painted with a black contrast paint. I've always liked this look. Instead of painting things like guns and armor plates fully with a metallic paint, I find a black base coat with dry brushed metallic edges looks way cooler. It's like the contrast with metal against the black makes it look more like actual metal to my eye. I also gently brush over the edges of the red and gold armor in places. This is optional. I like the slightly worn look this gives, but this is personal taste. An immaculate red metallic armor probably wouldn't have this kind of wear going. As a visual experiment, I diluted a more pink red with medium and glazed that on in certain places on the armor panels, giving them a cooler tone here and there. This gives a little more depth and interest to the armor. Mainly I just wanted to show you how you can alter the red to suit your needs. If you wanted warmer red tones, you could glaze on something more orange, for example. This pink gives the miniature a little more sinister look, I think. I then move on to opaque paints. Off-white on what looks like cloth, but most probably isn't, to sort of guide these miniatures into Roman soldier land. My son is heavily into Asterix and Obelix at the moment. Also, Warhammer is not shy with its Roman influence. I used the same paint for the 2 faces, rather pale but a nice contrast to the rich red and gold. Some blue for the respiratory thingies that I later on will darken down with black contrast paint. And then I move on to some thin down contrast paints and washes for both faces and cloth. Grey contrast paint on a pale skin base is one of my new favourite skin tones. The first time I challenged myself properly with a time limit like this was during my recent visit to Scott, Miniac in the US. We were going to do a painting live stream and Scott gave me a Sisters of Battle miniature intended for his kill team. I decided to try and finish it during the live stream. The time limit didn't make me paint faster, but it made me move on, not getting stuck in one place for too long. Settling for a simpler standard, taking some shortcuts. And I pretty much finished it, apart from the base. And I honestly kind of surprised myself. I'm not a fast painter, but the mini looked alright. And the experience gave me a new mental tool, the knowledge that I could do this if I set myself to a certain standard. And that in turn spurred me to paint these 5 Terminators. This Terminator color scheme is planned in advance. I never painted it before or tried this red over gold technique before, but I had a rough plan of what paints to use and in what order. A lot of the time when we paint, not knowing what paints to use or in what order to apply them is what swallows up time. Figuring out an efficient color scheme obviously helps if one wants to get things on the table or in the hands of children rapidly. This is not really the essence of the exercise, but in my case, this time, I've been very mindful of reducing the amount of steps. Like going for an all-gold base coat, altered in places to become red or black by the use of transparent paints. All dry brushed with the same silver. The cream-colored cloth or whatever uses the same paint as the skin, painting the faces primarily with just the one base layer, a few washes and some hasty highlights with the original base paint. The little bits of green on some details and on the sword are using the same paints. You get my point. In the end, for many out there painting full armies, these are the kind of things that can be useful to keep in mind if you want your army on the table faster than my Stormcast army that I started painting 2 years ago, and that's just over halfway done. By the way, if you don't mind, please press the like button now. It really helps. I was now really feeling like I wanted to wrap this up. My evening was dragging out. Having started a bit before 5, it was now closing in on 10. And there's not much point in setting a time limit and not sticking to it. But I had one additional step that would drag this out. For a clean Warhammer look, I could be done. The miniatures look nice, they pop. The red looks great, especially with that added pink red in places. But you see, Warhammer takes place in the grim, dark future. I'm a very big fan of the grim and dark. My son would maybe not agree on this point, as he thinks that bling goes before grim. Also, you might not agree with what is about to happen either. But I be damned if I don't grime these down a bit. I'm going to create an oil wash of equal parts black, brown and purple oil paint, mixed with white spirit. Cover the miniatures entirely, and once the paint has settled, clean off excess wash with Q-tips moistened in white spirit. This will stain everything slightly, but mainly leave a dark tone in all the recesses that I can't reach with the Q-tip. If you're new to oil washes, there's bound to be plenty of tutorials to watch on the subject. But the essence of the matter is that the oil paint and the white spirit does not interfere greatly with the acrylic paint underneath. So I can perform the erasing with the Q-tip without disturbing the original paint layers. But yes, there is a but involved here too. Because this has all been painted rather rapidly, the acrylic paint has not quite been given the time to harden fully. Acrylic paint dries fast but can take longer than we think to cure fully. So in this case, rubbing around with a Q-tip can rip off paint. This has more to do with the Q-tip than the oil paint and white spirit. In a perfect world, I would have let the miniatures sit till the day after before performing this task. This last step on the miniatures also meant I won't be completely done in an evening because the oil wash will need overnight to dry. But I really like the effect. As I said, it's not for everyone. The miniatures look just fine before the griming down, but for me, miniature soldiers locked in what seems eternal war. I mean, some of these fictional battles go on for years and years. That's why the super soldiers are needed in the first place, I guess. You imagine not eating, probably not going to the toilet, no one running up to you with a sports flask with rehydration energy drink mid-fight, and carrying around those really heavy guns, and probably not sleeping for a few years. I just don't see how you'd bother polishing your armor. I hope my son agrees. The matte nature of the oil paint takes away some of the luster, but we will remedy that with some varnish. The day after, once the oil paints were dry, I dusted the bases a little with some grey pigment powder for that freshly exploded concrete look. Painted the rim of the bases black and then varnished everything with a satin varnish. The varnish will bring back a little shine to the metallic armor, but most importantly protect the little soldiers from the gigantic dinosaur toys and the little feisty Lego ninjas that they surely will be locked in eternal struggle with. At least until bedtime. In a perfect world, I would have gone in with a brush and matte varnished the cloth and faces. But today is all about shortcuts, and some darlings will have to be left on the roadside, or if you prefer, in the gutter. Just make sure they're dead. I'm rather pleased with how these came out. I think the red metallic is great. I've got a hard time with metallics most of the time, but this one I don't mind. I hope you might find it useful in your miniature endeavors. Regarding the time limit, I'd say it's well worth giving it a try. Just with one miniature, to see where you're at. It could provide you with a rough estimate of how long you need to paint a miniature to a certain level, and from there on you can plan the army or the warband. We did this challenge on my Patreon Discord recently, and I think a lot of people enjoyed it and were surprised at the results. Personally, I would never have set out to try and paint these Terminators in an evening if I wouldn't have tried painting the one miniature with Scott beforehand. And now I know if the scheme is right, I can probably paint a warband in a month or something, if I really needed to. A great thank you to my patrons. As always, your support is what keeps these videos coming out. Please, if you enjoyed this video and would like to support the effort, check out the links to my Patreon at the end of this video or down below in the description. You can also leave a super comment as support if a monthly subscription thing is not your cup of tea. Thank you for watching. Bye.